G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Today we are talking the All-Star Game, but with a bit of a fantasy spin. We've got the Fantasy Basketball All-Star Selection, Ball Boys style. Let's go.
Jordan open. Chicago with the lead. Bryant to Shaq.
Not a game. We talking about practice.
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Anything's possible.
Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Curry for three. Wow! Unbelievable. Making it rain in New York. We the North are now we the champions.
Not the destination, it's the journey. Mamba out.
G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at BallBoysNBA and on Instagram at BallBoys Fantasy Basketball. And I am joined with my co-host, the guru himself, Callum Mack. How are you, man?
Yeah, doing well. I'm excited. This is going to be a fun topic. It's the All-Star time of the year.
Yes.
And for that reason, I think it could be fun to just do a fantasy segment of All-Stars because obviously there'll be some names in here that will be a fair bit different from the actual team that will be announced in the next week or so.
Absolutely. I think that obviously fantasy and the real life NBA follow themselves, quite close. Obviously stats are an important part of NBA evaluation. However, there are some players that are maybe producing a lot more wins on your fantasy roster than they are for their NBA team. So for that reason, they might feature a bit more heavily on this roster here. And we just want to celebrate the great fantasy picks of the season, at least up until this point. We obviously usually do an award to the end of the season, but we haven't done an all-star team before. So we're treating this like, if you haven't checked it out already, we've done our regular all-star selections, bench and starters. That's already on the YouTube channel and on the podcast platforms. We're going to be doing the same kind of structure, East and West, still trying to fill the positions that is done in the All-Star game. So that backcourt, 3 front court for your starters, 2 backcourt, 3 front court for your bench, and then 2 wild cards at the end. We're going based off Yahoo's positions. So say, for example, LeBron James, we could select him either as a front court or a backcourt because he is point guard eligible and also small forward eligible on Yahoo. Hope that makes sense. It's just the best way for us to get it in there and sticking to the All-Star theme. So I want to throw it over to you, Cal. We're going to start again in the Eastern Conference. Your starters, please. Who have you got?
All right, so I have in my guard spots, I got Fred VanVleet. Great punt field goal guy. He's been killing it all season. I then have James Harden, similar stats guy. Got the assist there. He was a tough call for me over some of the other names. I then went with Miles Bridges as one of my forward guys, followed by Giannis, the Greek Freak, and Jason Tatum to round out my roster.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. I've got 3 names the same, and I've got 2 names different in our starting.
I think we should probably specify what we're considering here.
Yeah, true.
I personally considered the games played as probably outside of the stats. I then went probably to the games played, and then after that you can do what you like in terms of averages or things like that.
Yeah, I'm also considering where we drafted these players and what we were expecting from them this season. So my expectations are being taken into account. For example, I do have Fred VanVleet as my starting guard. I nearly made him my captain for this roster because he was a second-round player. He's currently putting up first-round value, so I think he is absolutely worthy of that spot. I've got James Harden there as well, and I also do have Miles Bridges because, like you said, he's played a lot of games. He's also someone who was drafted much later than a lot of these other guys, and he's performing well above expectations. So I think for that, he's an easy starter on the All-Star team for me. I'm going to throw, I think a name that I think you may have missed out there. I'm surprised you don't have him in there. I hope you have him later on. I think you will. But Joel Embiid is in my starters as well. I think he is someone who was taken towards the end of that first round. He's sort of like a mid to early first round guy at the moment. He's, compared to a lot of other guys, he's actually played a fair few games as well. A lot of players in that first round have missed a fair chunk of time. He has missed some time, but not a huge amount. So I think he is in my starting roster. And a name who I'm not sure if you will have him, but in your team at all, to be honest, I'm throwing Robert Williams in there from my Boston Celtics.
Of course you are.
This man, let me just point out how good this man has been, particularly recently. He has been, in the last, for the season, he's a top 25 player. So I just want to throw that right out there. And in the last month, as I pull up his stats right now, I believe he's inside the first round in the last month, and he's averaging less than, he's the 6th ranked player in the last 30 days, averaging 9 points per game. So this man, if you're punting threes, if you're punting points, or if you're punting free throw percentage, he is absolutely worthy of being an all-star for fantasy-wise. And if you have him on your roster like I do in Dynasty, you would appreciate this man being on the all-star starters. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Look, I'll say, look, I did not have him on either of my teams. I did consider him. I didn't even have him on the bench. So I know you're high on him. He obviously is a punt points guy. If you draft him, I think you were punting points. His blocks have been awesome. He gets a steal a game as well. Rebounds have been great. Field goal through the roof.
Yeah.
He was in consideration for me. He has played enough games as well. He's at 41 games played.
Yeah.
Pretty damn good, but he didn't quite scratch it in there for me. He really has to be on a punt points team, I think, or maybe a punt threes. But yeah, look, I guess shout out to Robert Williams. He made the starting lineup. What was his preseason rank?
His preseason rank was 45. I think he was probably more likely going around that 50 spot, to be honest. I think there's a few hesitations with him and whether or not he would start at the start of the season. But obviously when he started playing those preseason games next to Al Horford, we started to get very excited. And then we started to think that, okay, maybe he can be a top 40 kind of player. But he's still smashed our expectations. He's been putting up 32 minutes a night. The field goal percentage is maintained with a slightly higher minutes load. The assists are coming along for a center player, and he's like outside of the points and threes. This man is he's a 7 category player pretty much. He's just so good in a lot of different areas, and like you have disrespected him and left him off your all-star team. I think he's underrated still. He's still not getting the respect that he deserves, and he's kind of figured it out, man. He's worked it out how to play good fantasy basketball, and his NBA basketball is coming along as well. So I'm very excited to be someone who has Robert Williams on his dynasty roster.
Look, I will say, I'll bring up one guy on my bench. We'll start to get into the bench.
Yeah, let's go bench.
A similar person, DeMar DeRozan, I have on my bench. He's been killing it. He is 7th in punt threes for the season. And then Robert Williams is not that high, I will point out. And the preseason rank for DeMar DeRozan was actually lower, as in worse off than it was Robert Williams. So there's probably a case there to slide him out, but I know you're a bit of a Celtic bias guy there. Anyway, I'll keep going.
Keep going, mate.
Won't even give you a chance to respond. So guards, I had Trae Young.
Yeah,
Trae Young was pretty tough for me to not get in the starting lineup. I ended up going with James Harden just because the assists were slightly better, and I feel like you knew what you were getting with James Harden when you got him. Plus the rebounds are awesome, but you still had the same things in terms of field goal and turnovers for both of them. So the trump card kind of was, I guess, the rebounds is probably what did it for me. Everything else is somewhat similar. Games played has been pretty good for both of them as well. I had LaMelo Ball as another guard. And then for the forwards, I went with Joel Embiid was the first guy. Arguably, I could have put him, obviously, over Miles Bridges, but it was the games played that got him onto the bench.
Okay.
I've then gone with Kevin Durant. I think he has to be up there as well. And then DeMar DeRozan, who I mentioned. The wild cards, I've got Sabonis in there. Sabonis has played enough games. He's been killing it, triple-double machine.
Yeah, he's
and
played
then my
well
last
recently.
pick has been Vucevic to shape out my roster.
I like it. There's no one in there that I would vehemently argue against. I think they're all deserving names, and definitely much in consideration for me. I've got a few different players. I'll shout out the ones that I've got the same. I do have LaMelo Ball. I've got DeMar DeRozan there. I've got Kevin Durant. I've got Giannis, who you had in your starting roster. I didn't have Trae Young once again, so this is this sounds like me starting to hate Trae Young. I actually really like Trae Young. I think he's a good player, but it's more the expectation game for me. He was someone who I was considering on the sort of start of the second round that 13-14 kind of spot where he was kind of in consideration for me. He's slightly underperformed that. It's very harsh for me to sort of give him that criticism. He's actually had a really good statistical season, so he was very close to making the team. But just based on that expectation, he wasn't quite as good as some of these other guys. I've got a name in here which you might disagree with, but again, I'm thinking about expectations and where we drafted him and what he's done for your fantasy team. And if you drafted him, you'd be looking pretty good. Gary Trent Jr. has made my all-star bench because this man has just been quietly putting up stats all season long. I'm waiting for it to drop off. It hasn't yet. The steals are huge. The threes are huge. The efficiency is solid. He's put up a lot of points recently as well, a couple of 30 games in the last week. And someone who is just rocketing up the rankings. I think he's inside the top 35 on the season, and he is someone who preseason was ranked well outside that. I'm just trying to find where his preseason rank was before the season. One moment. What are your thoughts on Gary Trent as I locate his rankings before the season?
It's good timing because he's put on a bit of an all-star push for this team. Over the past,
he has. He just got me over the line.
Over the past 5 games, he's put up more than 30 points and more than 5 3-pointers a game. I saw a short list of players that have done that before, and it's a pretty spectacular list in the likes of like James Harden, Steph Curry, and Gary Trent Jr. So
that's an all-star right there.
Exactly. And when you have a look at the steals, when that is considered, I mean, he's almost leading the league, 1.9 a game. He's obviously played a lot of games as well. The turnovers at 0.9 does really help your team if you worry about that. The 3-3 percentage is there, 3.2 threes. Obviously, that comes with the points. Rebounds and assists, you'd like to be punting one of those too with them on your team. Probably more likely an assist punt.
But you don't have to when you're drafting him at 166 or you're picking him up off the waiver wire. Like, who cares?
That's a good point.
You just add him and then you just enjoy those threes, points, steals. Like, you don't have to be punting anything. He's a guy you literally got off the waiver wire. So that's why he's in my team.
Yep.
Go on.
I was going to say he's Klay Thompson-esque in his stat line.
Yeah. Klay Thompson with probably more steals even than what Klay would normally get. So shout out to Gary Trent. I'm actually not the biggest fan of Gary Trent in terms of his real life basketball game, but I've got to tip my hat where it's deserving, and he's had an awesome season so far, and it's just kept going. I also want to give a shout out to another player that snuck in there that I think is very deserving in Jarrett Allen. I think he and Robert Williams were kind of like in the same kind of tier preseason. Maybe Jarrett Allen was slightly behind Robert Williams, less hype going into the season with Mobley there, but he has just continually put up huge big men stats, is top 40 player on the season, and you could have got him sort of around that 65-70 zone. So based on expectations, I think he's been a huge win for a lot of teams this year. And the last guy as a wild card, I toyed about not putting him in here because of games played, but I have given the nod to Jimmy Butler, just because he is
my guy Jimmy.
Yeah,
I didn't put Jimmy in.
I know. I was surprised by that. He's been a first round player. He's the 5th ranked player on a per game basis. Yes, he's only played 33 games, but when a lot of players are missing a lot of games, I don't think it's that big of a hit that I leave him off a team and I put someone like a Sabonis in over him. But I could be persuaded otherwise. But he's healthy now. He's not like continually injured for the rest of the season. So I'm going to give him the edge and slide him in there.
Look, I love it. I love my guy, Jimmy Buckets. His stats have been awesome. If you get him, I think you were obviously punting the 3-pointers. I think that's probably why you do draft him. You pair him with a Nikola Jokic potentially or something like that. If you go back to our pairings back at the start of the season.
Yeah, or even if you could get like a Joel Embiid and a Jimmy Butler, if you were close to the turn there, I think that would have been a very nice pairing.
Yeah, 100%. So if you consider his rank of 5th overall for the season, when you don't really consider games played, that's just averages. I mean, hell yeah. Go Jimmy.
Yeah. All right, let's move over to the Western Conference, starting with your starters. I'm hoping we're going to be... I think the starters almost pick themselves here. Maybe the last front court player, but we'll see how we go. What are your thoughts on the starters?
Well, actually, I tossed up between 3 guards, so I'd have to cut one. So the 2 guards I stuck with were Steph Curry and DeJounte Murray. Yeah. I then went with Nikola Jokic at the first forward. He obviously has to be there. He's killing it. Karl Anthony Towns and LeBron James.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we've got one differing player, and it was the player that I was thinking we would differ on, but I think I know the guy that you were tossing him up with, and I do agree that they were pretty close. But I do also have Steph Curry and DeJounte Murray. Just a shout out to DeJounte Murray, man. Like, he has been putting up a season, man. Like, he is... I'm very excited. I traded him for him earlier in the season in our Dynasty League for James Harden, and so I'm very excited that he is on my roster for many years. But the triple-double numbers, the steals that are there, the low turnovers, and the high assists is a rare combination to have. So he is just someone that I'd be very, very pleased with if you drafted him in the 40s, where he was getting drafted in most years. We did highlight him as a potential breakout player. I don't think we were quite on him as much as we should have been, but he is someone that huge shout out. LeBron James is a pretty good one. He's the second-ranked player per game. Obviously, he was probably back end of the second round. Once we heard that Zion's injury was fairly severe, we pushed him up our rankings in terms of a punt free throw kind of guy to pair with your Giannis. So hopefully you were able to get him if you did have that Giannis build. But even without punting free throws, he's been really, really solid. And the guy I've got different here is Rudy Gobert. I've got Rudy Gobert over Karl Anthony Towns only because Gobert. We know that when we were drafting him, he's a punt free throw percentage guy. He's 15th on the year regardless, but as soon as you turn that punt free throws, he rockets up into the top 3 per game value. So I think that he is someone who is doing exactly what you wanted him to do. He's even improved his rebounds this year. His field goal percentage has actually gone up as well. So he's actually improved on what he already was putting up very impressive numbers last year. So I think that's a huge win. So he's on my starters.
Yeah. Shout out to Rudy. I actually mucked up my initial starting 5 and had him in there, and then realized I didn't put LeBron in, so he had to be cut. So essentially, he probably was my first forward pick afterwards.
Yeah.
So he's obviously on my bench.
Yeah, and I also obviously do have Karl Anthony Towns on my bench as well. And we haven't talked about Jokic and Steph, who obviously were two basically top 3 or 4 picks. They're doing what they're doing. Steph's obviously had a bit of a cold stretch, but he's still the 4th ranked player on the season. And Jokic obviously was picked 1. He is 1, so that's as good as you can basically do at your first pick is just not lose value, and he's absolutely done that, putting up another MVP caliber season. Let's go on to the bench where things might get a little bit more interesting. Who have you got on the bench for the West, Cal?
All right, so on the bench in the guard spot, I had Chris Paul, who look, I did honestly consider for my starting lineup. He's killed it this season. He's played a lot of games. If you got Chris Paul, he obviously fits your points build. And if you got him for that build, your team should be shaping out fairly nicely for sure. I'm
telling you, man, punt points this year was
really good.
Good,
100%. It's like interesting you say that because the next guard who I had in this list is a punt points guy as well. Tyrese Halliburton. He's been putting up games. He was a punt points guy going into the season. If you do the punt points, he is the 6th rank player.
Wow.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
He did have a bit of hype going into the season. He jumped up to 50th in the preseason, but that's still awesome. In his total value, he's at 15. Just because of the games played and the stats he's putting up. And 6th in punt points. So shout out to him. Punt points for the guards.
Yeah, well, you could have had like a Robert Williams and a Chris Paul, a Tyrese Halliburton, maybe even a DeJounte Murray might have fit that build as well. Like all these guys, you would probably be considering in a punt points kind of build, and those guys would get a lot of value, and they've all sort of popped off. So there's something to it. There's something to it, man. I also had Chris Paul and Tyrese Halliburton as my first guards picked. So I am in agreement there. Who have you got in your front court? Obviously, you've got Rudy Gobert there. Who are your other 2 players on the bench?
So Rudy Gobert is the first guy. I then went with Jaren Jackson Jr., who has really turned it on as of late, honestly. So the blocks have just been awesome for him. He's also played 52 games, which is huge.
He's one of the leaders in the league in games played.
Yeah. And then I actually went to Jonas Valanciunas. There's a lot of question marks I had around him, especially with Zion. But because Zion's out, he has been balling, similar to what he put up last season. And then to round out my last couple spots, I have Luka Doncic and Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, you've gone Luka, have you? I'm surprised by that because he has been a bit of a disappointment in terms of fantasy this year. Obviously, he was a first-round pick. Some people would take him as high as like 3 or 4. I personally have left him off my All-Star team just because of
I flipped a coin. It was him or Anthony Edwards, and I ended up just cutting Anthony Edwards, sadly. Yeah. But maybe you've convinced me maybe to sub him in. But Luka, I understand he was a first rounder. He has been disappointing. Yeah. But the pure stats are still pretty damn good. And on a weekly basis, he can obviously win you weeks. So, and that was kind of why I threw him in there. We should say that we are probably, we're prone to doing head-to-head. So we're using that. We talk a lot about punting and things like that. So on a head-to-head basis, the ranking doesn't matter as much as like a roto format, especially if you are punting certain categories. His like counting stats, his points, threes, rebounds, assists are all obviously very strong still, and haven't taken a huge drop off there. But the percentages have not improved and in fact have gone a little bit backwards. So he won't be making an appearance on my team. I am also interested by your Valanciunas selection. He was someone that I did consider. Didn't quite make my roster though. I'm going to throw out a player there who, look, maybe these are all biases because I've got him on my dynasty team as well, but Jakob Poeltl makes my all-star bench because, again, if you turn that punt free throw percentage on, he catapults up the rankings nearly on the edge of a first-round player. He's a 13th ranked player in a punt free throw percentage, the 100th ranked player otherwise. So it's a huge swing if you are doing that because obviously he's shooting a very paltry like 44% or something like that. So it's a big hit to your free throw percentage, but especially recently, the steals, the blocks, the field goal percentage, he's even putting up some decent points. The rebounds are very high, and much like Robert Williams, he's actually a decent passer for the big men as well. So I wanted to give Jakob Poeltl a good shout out for those punt free throw percentage teams out there. And I've got Ja Morant and I've got Desmond Bane as well to round out my wild cards. As a couple of guys from Memphis. Desmond Bane, a similar argument to the Gary Trent Jr. He was someone who was like your last pick of the draft, and he is absolutely brained it this year. He's a top 50 player or thereabouts for the season, and obviously pre-rank of 169. Actually, I should correct myself. He's a top 30 player on the season, even higher than Gary Trent Jr., just based on huge threes, excellent percentages, lots of points, decent assists and steals as well, low turnovers. So big shout out to Desi Bane, who I know you were hot on in the preseason and should have listened to you. Yeah, Desi Bane, he's killing it. I did consider him, 100% did consider him. Unfortunately, I decided to kind of probably put Anthony Edwards a little bit above him. Yeah, I can understand. If you look at the preseason stuff, then yeah, 100%. Desmond Bane. I didn't consider that as highly as you did. Yeah,
fair enough. It sounds like you've gone a bit more of the top end talent. I've thrown in at least a couple with Gary Trent and Desmond Bane in there, just because I think if you did pick them, they're causing you to have a lot of wins in fantasy basketball. We didn't touch on Jaren Jackson Jr. as much. I also had him in my team. He was sort of like one of those last spots, and it was those games played, plus the fact that he's just such a unique player with those threes and blocks. Solid points and free throw percentage from the big man as well. And I can even see him getting better for the second half of the season, just because he is still so young and they're still figuring it out over there in Memphis. So I really like JJJ.
Yeah, 100%. In the past month, he's put up like almost 3.5 blocks a game, which is absolutely crazy. I think going forward in future drafts, you if you're a punt field goal kind of guy, he's a huge candidate. Yeah. I tried to make him into a punt rebound build in the preseason. If you remember, I paired him with a Chris Paul. I think
that's right. Yeah, I do remember.
Amongst some other players, and maybe that team would have turned out pretty good.
Yeah, that team might have been pretty nice. I will say that.
Looking back now, maybe it would have. But then again, I had someone like Brook Lopez, who the punt rebound, so he's been out for the rest of the season. So look, anyway, Jaren Jackson Jr. well deserved. He started slow, but he's been cooking.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anyone that you want to shout out that we haven't mentioned that was on your honorable mentions that you couldn't quite fit in there? For me, it was players like Anthony Davis, Donovan Mitchell, Anthony Edwards, and Kristaps Porzingis, who were all very close to making my roster. Obviously, Anthony Davis just with a few injuries and things like that. Also, he's just kind of done what we expected him. He hasn't actually beaten his expectations like a few of these other guys. Same with Donovan Mitchell. What are your thoughts? Anyone that you wish you could have another spot to put in?
I did actually have Donovan Mitchell just as my last wild card.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So he did just slide in. But he's just been putting up exactly what you expect on that weekly basis. Yeah, I've got him on one of my teams. in a punt assist build where I can run him as my point guard, which is a pretty good fit. And on the weeks where he gets hot, it's awesome. He's killing it. You get 40-point games. So I put him in there. Look, maybe there is some bias because I do own him.
I think it's warranted. It was very hard for me to leave him off there. But I wanted to reward Desi Bain and his insane.
I don't hate it.
Yeah, his insane jump from the preseason rankings. All right, well, let's call it there, guys. Let us know who's made your fantasy all-star team, whether it's from your team that you drafted or players you wish you drafted. Let us know if you think, if you like our teams, if you don't like our teams, what you would change, what you would do different. And make sure you give the video a thumbs up by liking it. Make sure you hit the notification bell so when we drop new fantasy videos that are hot off the press, you get notified and you can watch them straight away. Until next time, we'll catch you later. Bye.